Hi, and welcome to the Dream Season podcast, an oral history of the 1989-90 UConn men's basketball season, also known as the Dream Season. This is Episode 5, Preseason Intrigue. The roster for the 1989-90 UConn men's basketball team was nearly complete. There was only one senior on the team, point guard Tate George. He was joined by four juniors, forwards Lyman DePriest and Murray Williams, along with guards John Gwynn and Steve Peichel. There were four sophomores in the mix, centers Mark Sir and Dan Cerulik, forward Rod Sellers, and guard Chris Smith. Five freshmen had committed by the end of May 1989. Forward Scott Burrell, Terreno Walker, and Marte Smith were joined by shooting guard Phil Dixon. The roster also featured two walk-ons, Oliver Macklin and Tim Peichel. Unfortunately, Phil Dixon wouldn't make it through the summer. Dixon, who Calhoun referred to as the number one incoming foreign player in basketball, was participating in UConn's Center for Academic Programs course during the summer to help give him a head start on some of his core classwork. When Dixon was 14 years old, he was accused and convicted of sexual assault. The case was recently reopened as Dixon fought to prove his innocence. Dixon would eventually prevail and be cleared of the charges. However, while at UConn during the summer of 1989, Dixon had four separate issues with females on campus. No charges were filed, but Calhoun had seen enough. On Monday, August 21st, Phil Dixon was released from his scholarship at UConn and dismissed from the team. Here's Calhoun on the dismissal of Dixon from the Hartford Courant the day after. Quote, "It was an institutional and basketball decision. Phil violated the conduct code of the program he was involved with. His conduct was unacceptable. He did not do what we wanted him to do as a basketball player. It had nothing to do with academics, and it had nothing to do with drugs. Phil Dixon, as a basketball player, certainly let us and himself down. We put a challenge before him, and he was unable to meet it. We felt it was in the best interest of the university and the basketball program to release him." End quote. Calhoun told the New London Day, quote, "We set some standards for conduct and he didn't meet those. It was one of the toughest decisions I've ever had to make because I like him and he's a terrific basketball player." End quote. Years later, Calhoun remembered the moment in his 1999 biography, Dare to Dream, written with famed author Lee Montville. Said Calhoun, quote, "I was on the road recruiting when I got a phone call. Phil Dixon was in another jam with a girl on our campus. It didn't seem like much, but I didn't like it. Not with the first incident. I flew home, talked to Phil, and told him it was over. I suppose he eventually could have done okay, and I still think he's a nice kid, but the newspapers are going to get a hold of this, and his life would have been miserable at UConn. I called Rick Majerus at Utah for him. He would be better off somewhere else." End quote. Here's UConn assistant coach Dave Lato on the Dixon situation.
I don't think that it spilled over to the team as much as it spilled over to the program and the atmosphere around the university. This is how things are done. We want to win, but we're not going to win at all costs. Phil had gotten into a little situation. Obviously, we all knew at the time in Toronto after we had recruited him. And to this day, I don't know all the details, but I think it was more guilt by association of being somewhere he shouldn't, wrong place, wrong time. And we all knew that he was very, very good. He'd scored over 100 points in a game. He was a natural born scorer. So wanting him was at a very high level, but understanding, there are limits to what you can do to be successful. So I don't know how much the players knew the details of it. They knew him because he had visited, and, we had a summer program that he had got ready to come into and all that kind of stuff. So there was some intimacy beyond just him being a recruit, but I don't know that they understood or could face the dilemma of should he come here, should he not, given the issues that he was dealing with. So programmatically, we had to move on. It was disappointed because it was a thought that we had a really good piece to our future, and obviously it didn't work out that way, but we made up for it.
With the dismissal of a key recruit, the Huskies had already suffered a loss before practice even began. However, there was still one more potential recruit interested in joining the Huskies for the 1989-90 season. In early April of 1989, Jim Calhoun received a call from Marv Kessler, a longtime basketball coach and scout from New York City. Marv asked Jim if he would be interested in a player that Kessler described as the Larry Bird of Israel. Nadav Henefeld was a 6-foot 7-inch forward who could handle the ball and had good basketball instincts. He had just completed his mandatory service in the Israeli army, so he was older than most recruits at age 21. Henefeld was in the United States to visit St. John's. Unfortunately for St. John's, their campus in Queens didn't fit Nadav's image of what an American college campus should look like. So he wanted to see what UConn had to offer, which led to Kessler's call to Calhoun. Here's Nadav talking about his desire to play college basketball and those campus visits in April of 1989.
It was a dream back then, back then it was a whole different world, to go and play college basketball. I didn't really know much about it. I just know that there is college basketball. I know that I want to play in a high level of basketball. It wasn't even close to the way things are now because there was no cables, no internet, even nothing, no mobile phones. It looks like in the old days. But apparently, in a way, it was. So yeah, I did want to go and play. I didn't know much. I just asked one of my friends who lived in the States, lived in Boston. I told him I want to go and play college basketball, not much more than that. And we kind of started looking for a fair place to play. We looked for a good conference, that would be a good competition. But I wanted to go logically. I wanted to go to not one of the best teams in these conferences so I can try and compete against them. Because if I went to the best team, I could probably see really nice games, but from the bench, and I wanted to play. So it was simple mathematics, as we say, to go to a very good conference, but not to one of the best teams so I can get my chance to play. And that's how I got there. If to make a long story short, at the beginning, I went to see St. John's because there was a coach who coached in Israel and saw me and recommended to Luka Naseka, back then who was the coach, to see me. And I went to check them up, but it didn't really fit me because they didn't really have, it was off-campus apartments, and it wasn't really a college life kind of university. So for someone who comes from overseas, it didn't really suit me. So the next school that was very close was Connecticut. So I called up and say if I can come and see school. And as soon as I got there, it was like the negative for St. John's, kind of old trees and nice and calm place and everything. So I said to myself, if I have to choose one of these two, there's no question. And that's how I chose it. And I asked for a scholarship. And apparently at the end, I got it. And that's it. I packed up a bag and said hi to my family, to my father. And that's it. Got on the plane and went to see how it is to play college basketball.
Over the years, legends have emerged about how Henefeld made his way to the UConn campus. They range from Nadav taking a helicopter directly to stores to accidentally driving by the campus and stopping in. Here's Coach Lato to set the story straight.
Yeah, so I mean, each guy kind of has their own little anecdote and story, and the I don't know if the kind of correction on Nadav is that when Jim got that call, hey, he's at St. John's, he's visiting, doesn't quite feel 100% comfortable. Would you guys run him? He actually flew on a little small commuter jet from New York to Bradley and picked him up, and very shy, introvert, as you can imagine, and bringing him back to campus. And, but he had such a magnetic personality from his maturity. He was 21 at the time. So that worked out.
In July, Calhoun traveled to Israel to watch Henefeld play in the Maccabi Games, also known as the Jewish Olympics, where Henefeld led Israel to their first championship in 16 years and was named MVP of the event. In August, Henefeld enrolled in classes at UConn, but the news was not all good. When he took the SATs, he fell about 20 points short of reaching the required 700 to be eligible. UConn petitioned the NCAA to allow Henefeld to retake the SATs in early October, as Calhoun felt that his 3 years serving in the Israeli army immediately following his high school graduation should warrant a waiver to allow for a retake of the test. On September 14th, the NCAA ruled in UConn's favor. He was allowed to take the SATs again on October 14th, this time on the campus of NC State in Raleigh, North Carolina, at his own expense. Before Henefeld made it on campus, work was already underway to ensure that the disappointment of the 1988-89 season would not repeat itself. Tate George, the lone senior, and Steve Peichel were named co-captains, and they began laying the groundwork for what they hoped would be a more cohesive and focused team. Said George, quote, "We'll be a team in every sense of the word if Steve and I have anything to do with it. There aren't going to be many eyes on this team, if any," end quote. George and Peichel organized preseason drills and study halls for their teammates, which were labeled as voluntary, but not in reality. Steve Peichel, quote, "If Tate and I have to be there, everybody has to be there. The same rules apply whether it's Smitty or my brother," end quote. Coach later reflects on the renewed focus the team had following the disappointment of the previous season.
In terms of taking care of things in-house and working harder and doing more, holding more guys accountable to getting better and focusing in, understanding the taste of winning, and then, the bitterness of losing, and how the decisions are made each day about how you go about the business to change your fortunes. We had created just a little bit of not just excitement, but expectation now for the first time in a long time. And then there was disappointment after that expectation. So it left a bitter taste in everyone's mouth. So that process in the spring and in the summer really, I think, grabbed people's attention, particularly in the locker room and in the basketball office.
Rod Sellers recalled a similar feeling.
I remember everybody come back and we had like a different focus. And then, we were coming back. Again, like I love Cliff to death. I love Gamble to death. But my freshman year, the offense revolved around them. Cliff, Gamble, and then Smitty. John would come in and John would get his shots up, but he didn't play a lot of minutes. He didn't get a lot of shots. But the offense revolved around them. I remember, I said, man, they're leaving. There's some points out there to be had. And, it almost like we came together like this. Oh man, like a fist, like solid team. But yeah, we came back that summer. I remember Tate just had this different energy about him. Like again, I'll say he's always confident, but he had like a different, like a more confident disposition about him. And we all kind of followed that. Like Tate was the confidence of the team. Smitty was the point, so he could score. Smitty was the man. Scott was the freak athlete. Peichel was like the leader. He was one of the leaders. Then you had the glue guys, me, Murray, Lyman, and John. We were all in there. Just did whatever it took, to play and to win. But yeah, I remember coming back and you could sense amongst us that it was going to be something different. I didn't know how special it was going to be, but you could sense it was going to be something different than the year before.
47% of the team's offense had left with the departures of Cliff Robinson and Phil Gamble. Chris Smith was the highest scoring returning player after averaging 9.9 points as a freshman. For the first time since Calhoun took over in 1986-87, his team was finally composed of the type of basketball player that he preferred, the athletic wing player who can run the floor and play defense aggressively. On paper, the Huskies would only be starting one player taller than 6'5", forcing the team to become more of a guard-focused, outside-in team, rather than the other way around. Said Calhoun, quote, "We're going to compensate for the fact that we seem to have a deficiency, and that seems to be experienced quality scoring inside. The effort has been good the whole preseason. Rod Sellers has been terrific, and as far as the overall center position, we're like a very, very good donut, and we need a munchkin someplace. You know what I'm saying? A munchkin would help," end quote. Calhoun continued, quote, "With Smitty, Scott Burrell, Sellers, John Gwynn, and Murray Williams, when he's healthy, we're not strong, but we're very athletic, and we would like to take advantage of that. I've coached teams like this at Northeastern. It's the kind of style we're fitted to play. It's more fun to watch, more fun to play, and more fun to coach," end quote. The pressure was seemingly off UConn, especially compared to the season prior, coming on the heels of the NIT championship. Calhoun often referred to this team as, quote, "interesting," and he said that it was fun watching the pieces start to come together. The players and coaching staff were excited about the new makeup of the team, but college basketball prognosticators were less enthusiastic. In their annual preseason poll, the Big East coaches picked UConn to finish 8th out of 9 teams in the conference. Georgetown was predicted to finish first, followed by Syracuse, and then Pittsburgh. In their Hartford Courant's Big East preview, the Huskies' postseason chances were listed as, quote, "should be happy with a 3rd consecutive NIT appearance," end quote. The low expectations would fuel the Huskies, and it wouldn't take long for outsiders to realize why Calhoun thought his team was so interesting. The first official practice of the season for the Huskies was held on Sunday, October 15th, 1989. Unlike the previous season, there was no Midnight Madness this year, just a 2.5-hour workout on a Sunday morning and then some classroom work in the evening. There was still one member of the team who wasn't able to participate in the first practice of the season. Until the school learned of Nadav Henefeld's SAT results, he could not practice with the team. Jay Hoffman, UConn's unofficial strength coach, remembers working with Nadav.
He wasn't able to practice with the team. In fact, Jim had me practice one-on-one. He goes, play football with him. You know, he wanted me to be rough. So the Big East underneath the boards is like playing on the offensive line. And he says, knock him around a little bit, be very physical with him to get him used to what it's like. And I'm at 19, I was 28 years old, so I still have some ability to do some things. And so we got to be very close, working together. We developed a very good camaraderie. You know, besides the fact that we spoke the same language, I could communicate with him. My love for Israel being Israeli, so it was it became a very good relationship.
On October 30th, UConn received word that Henefeld had scored over 800 on the SATs and therefore would be eligible to become an official member of the team. However, the school still had to wait for the official results to arrive via U.S. mail and then submit them to the NCAA for verification. Even after all that, there was still one more hurdle to clear regarding Henefeld's eligibility. Earlier in October, UConn and the NCAA received an anonymous package, which included Israeli newspaper articles and a letter written in Hebrew, claiming that Henefeld had been paid to play basketball in Israel and was therefore not an amateur and ineligible to play college basketball. In reality, Henefeld had played against professionals while on a club team, but he wasn't paid to play. After conducting an investigation, UConn, the Big East, and the NCAA all reached the same conclusion. Nadav was not paid and is eligible to play for the Huskies. While all of Nadav's off-court drama played out, the other members of the team continued to round it to shape. Bob Usler, who would be starting his first season as a radio play-by-play voice for the Huskies this season, recalls the uncharacteristic optimism that was being shared by Coach Calhoun prior to the season starting.
Well, I will say this. I had gone to a couple of practices in the field house and remember just the coaches, taking the cue of the coaches. They were very happy about what they were seeing preseason. And then at a preseason luncheon, the media luncheon to kick off the year, Jim Calhoun gets up and he talks about this team in pretty glowing terms. You know, often the coaches will, if they have that feeling, they'll undersell it a little bit. Let the chips fall where they may. Or keep their cards close to the vest is a better way of putting it. He was showing his cards. He was talking about this team before they played a game as a team that might do something special because they were seeing Nadav Henefeld for the first time. None of us knew on the outside what Nadav Henefeld was going to be. They were seeing Scott Burrell, freshman, somebody who, again, was, although very highly touted as an incoming prospect out of the state of Connecticut. They were seeing him every day in practice. Plus, they were getting a sense of what the team had been doing in the preseason. And, you in retrospect, you hear Tate George talk about, how they worked so hard in the summer and Steve Peichel and George getting together and really making a commitment. And, the coaches were seeing all this. Fans, they weren't seeing it. They were seeing a team that had been, what were they, picked preseason last in the Big East? 8th out of 9. Yeah. So, that's what the general consensus was. And you're still hearing the stuff about should UConn get out of the Big East. And they're 8th out of 9 teams. So anyway, you're getting an inkling that maybe this team is a little bit better than people are, sizing them up to be.
Henefeld's first day of eligibility coincided with UConn's first exhibition game of the season, a showdown at the Fieldhouse against Marathon Oil on November 1st. Marathon Oil was a semi-pro club team featuring recently graduated college players. The 1989 Marathon Oil team featured two familiar names to UConn fans, Phil Gamble and Jeff King, who famously sat atop a Madison Square Garden backboard together after helping to lead UConn to the 1988 NIT championship. UConn officially learned that Henefeld was eligible at about 3 p.m. that same afternoon, and Nadav promptly ran through some plays with Steve Peichel, Mark Sir, Oliver Macklin, and Marte Smith. Calhoun decided to go with a wrinkle in the starting lineup for the first official action of the season, choosing to start John Gwynn over Tate George. Gwynn was joined in the starting lineup with Chris Smith, Rod Sellers at center, along with Scott Burrell and Lyman DePriest at the forward spots. If the benching of George meant to send a message to the senior co-captain, it worked. Tate provided a noticeable spark off the bench, finishing with 16 points and 9 assists in 21 minutes of action in the 101-78 UConn victory. Chris Smith led all scorers with 31 points on 12 of 20 shooting, including 5 3-pointers. The Huskies led by only 3 points at the half, 48-45, and the score remained close throughout the second half, until a 25-8 run over the final 6 minutes allowed Calhoun to relax. Said Calhoun, quote, "I'm happy to report we're undefeated, and I'm happy to report we're still winless. The game was a good way to evaluate where we stand." End quote. A notable moment in the game occurred with 6 minutes, 32 seconds left in the first half, as Nadav Henefeld checked in for his first real action with his teammates. Henefeld notched 2 points, 4 rebounds, a steal, and a block in 8 minutes of action. Said Calhoun, "He certainly knows how to play basketball. We knew after 1 minute. Maybe we won't let the other kids practice either." Here's UConn's longtime Director of Athletic Communications, Tim Tolikin, on Henefeld's participation after not practicing with the team all preseason.
When Nadav committed to Jim, a few of the Israeli people referred to him as the Larry Bird of Israel. So he shows up, but he's not eligible from an NCAA standpoint, SAT-wise, because he hasn't taken either the ACT or the SAT, and they've got to find a place where he can take it. And then you have to wait for the result. The other thing they had to prove going along was NCAA eligibility, that he wasn't a pro because he had played club ball in Israel. And that took time. Well, what happens is during that time on both those issues, he could not practice with the team. So he never practiced preseason with the team. We played Marathon Oil on November 1st in an exhibition game. That day, Nadav is cleared. Both he's not a pro and he's got the SAT score. He never practiced with the team. He worked out in the gym a little bit that afternoon with like 2 or 3 guys. Jim used them for 8 minutes in the Marathon Oil game, and his career started in that fashion, having never practiced. I mean, it's hard to even believe, but he never practiced with the team in total before he played a game in the field house at UConn, which to this day is still pretty marvelous that he did what he did that year.
The Marathon Oil game was the first time the public got to see the new-look Huskies. UConn attempted 24 3-pointers, making 9 of them. That doesn't seem like much based on present-day basketball trends, but for the late 80s, it marked a massive change for the Huskies. In Calhoun's first 3 seasons in stores, his teams averaged just 8 threes per game. Now that Henefeld was officially part of the team, he was able to fully participate in practices. Here's Nadav recalling his very first day that he had to report to the field house for practice.
I remember the first practice of the year. I put the alarm clock on the table away from me, so when it's going to turn off, I'll just get up and go. And one of my roommates just turned it off and didn't tell me, and it took me some time, and then I got a call from one of the managers, like, what's up, how's it going? It's 6:30, practice starts, what's going on? So this was my first practice. I put on my clothes like in 2 minutes. I ran. I got to the field house. But the beginning was the field house just before we went to Camp Pavilion. And if you know how the field house was, it was like a track, and in the middle there was the basketball court. Around it there was this curtain, kind of, so it wouldn't disturb to practice. And I just opened it. I remember I kind of opened it and was like, hello, and coach turned around and he's like, go, start running on the track around. And I ran for the whole practice. I ran there. At the end of practice, he sent, I think he sent Steve, who was the captain, to ask me what happened without stopping running. I mean, he came to run around me, next to me, asking me. So I liked it because I really believe in this way, to be sharp and straight and disciplined.
There were 12 days in between the Marathon Oil game and UConn's final preseason matchup against the Soviet Union national team. That was a good thing, as the team was dealing with some nagging injuries. Murray Williams was dealing with a stress fracture in his left leg, the same injury in the same leg that he dealt with the previous season. Steve Peichel sat out a few practices to rest his chronically sore right shoulder, the same shoulder that forced him to redshirt for the 1988-89 season. Chris Smith had a particularly nasty bout with strep throat that caused him to lose 10 pounds. He was also scheduled to have his wisdom teeth removed. Here's Smitty recalling that dental procedure.
Man, let me tell you something. The wisdom, that was the worst. I remember having my wisdom teeth taken out, and I had a bad case of it. I had all 4 taken out, and it felt like I was still up when they were doing it, and it was like they were breaking my jaw, man. And I remember that, and I remember being home, and I was out. I was bleeding out my mouth a lot, and it really took me out. I couldn't eat, man. And that was really a bad time for me, man, because I've never been through anything like that, never felt anything like that. But they kind of slowed my process. But one thing, if you know about Jim Calhoun, he's going to jump you right back into the season, man. Once we got to practice, it was all full speed.
On Monday, November 13th, the Huskies hosted the Soviet Union national team at the Civic Center for their final tune-up of the preseason. Jim Calhoun had one wish heading into the game, not to get beat too bad. The Soviets featured 2 starters from the 1988 Olympic gold medal team, and were coming off consecutive 5-point defeats to 2 teams that Sports Illustrated had predicted to reach the Final Four, number 3 LSU and number 1 UNLV. Said Calhoun, "They will probably be the best team we will play all year, or awfully close to it." Calhoun inserted Tate George back into the starting lineup, along with Chris Smith, Dan Cerulik, Rod Sellers, and Scott Burrell. The Soviets had a decided size advantage over the Huskies, so Calhoun chose to take advantage of the Huskies' quickness and unleashed a full-court press on the visitors. The gamble paid off, as UConn held the Soviets at 37% shooting from the floor, forced 13 turnovers, and even won the rebounding battle, 56-38, on the way to a 97-87 victory. Once again, Chris Smith led the Huskies with 28 points, and his defense held the Soviet point guard Teek Sok to just 10 points. Sok, who was a member of that gold medal winning team in the '88 Olympics, averaged 27.5 points in his 2 games against LSU and UNLV. Freshman Scott Burrell flashed a glimpse of his abilities, scoring 13 points, which included being on the receiving end of a half-court alley-oop pass from Steve Peichel that brought the Civic Center crowd to its feet. Rod Sellers added 20 points and 8 boards as the Huskies continued to look for their go-to big man. UConn's performance against the favored Soviets opened some eyes. The Huskies' defense held the Soviets to 15 fewer points than UNLV did and 22 points fewer than LSU. UNLV was also out-rebounded by the Soviets, 54-45. Soviet coach Vladis Garastas said after the game, quote, "UConn played better defense than the other 2, but this was a little surprise. Many people talk like this team is not that great. UConn is just as good as the other 2 teams we've played." End quote. Here's Calhoun reflecting on the win over the Soviet national team and why he continually referred to this team as interesting during the preseason.
Yeah, the biggest thing we had to do, to be honest with you, was make the adjustment to playing different. We always wanted to run, but in the early years, we didn't have enough players to run. My first year, we had 7 scholarship players. So, and we wanted to press, and I'd always press. I'd been fortunate enough many years ago to go out and spend 2 hours with Coach Wooden and at UCLA. And 2-to-1 press was something we wanted to do. And then the fact that we had, this kind of intriguing guy from Israel, Nadav Henefeld, and we started going through some of the names, and we were very athletic. We only had one guy, pure shooter. Johnny Gwynn could make baskets, but Chris Smith. So as you go through the personality, said, if we can create tempo of the game, if we can turn folks over and come right back at them, we got a chance. And every day it was someone different. Might have been a young Murray Williams, Lyman DePriest, whoever it may be, Johnny Gwynn, Tate. And we were an interesting team. I could see that. And then I think you hit the point. Marathon area was fine. But the Soviets had beat, if I remember correctly, Vegas and Indiana. And when we beat them, we were talking to Coach Goljevkok, I think his name was, about the situation. And he said, "You're the best team you played." And, kind of gave 2 or 3 different looks. And he knew somewhat where he spoke. He said, when you pressed us and went after us and ran, you were devastating. And so many words. So I think I got the idea that if we could stay with this, and we had a couple early ones that made us think maybe we shouldn't stay with this, we could be really interested. And here's the most difficult thing I always think about. Are we hard to play against? That's the key thing. If you're comfortable to play against, You'll beat some people, people beat you. But if we're hard to play against, everybody's going to in some way struggle against us.
Coming up on the next episode of the Dream Season podcast, the regular season begins with a 4,400-mile journey to Anchorage, Alaska. The Dream Season podcast is researched, written, and produced by me, Matt Edwards. Written sources for this episode are the Hartford Courant Archives, Google News Archives, the New York Times Archives, and Dare to Dream, written by Jim Calhoun and my golf buddy, Lee Montville. If you have any memories to share about anything I just mentioned, want to correct me on something I screwed up, or just have general feedback to give, send me an email at dreamseasonpod@gmail.com or call and leave me a message at 903-884-8990. If you leave your name and location, you may hear yourself in a future episode. You can also connect with the show via Twitter and Instagram at DreamSeasonPod. I want to apologize for the delay in putting this episode together, and I sincerely appreciate everyone's patience. As always, thank you so much for listening.